Thank you, Sage. Okay, welcome everyone. I am Andy Norman, and this is Examined Lives. If you're new, welcome. This is a forum for exploring fascinating questions in a collaborative way. And our topic today is climate change and despair. Let's see what we can do to turn that into an uplifting topic, shall we? Quick reminder, our method is something I call the mosaic method. We want to get many different succinct observations and reflections, questions, preferably under a minute apiece. So there's lots of turn taking, no long discourses, please. And let's see if we can assemble, collaboratively assemble a bright, colorful set of perspectives on this question. Fair enough? Everybody good with that? All right. So I'll say a few things to get the ball rolling, but I really want to hear from you guys. I think our topic today is somewhat less purely academic. We can certainly study the relationship between climate change and despair scientifically, but it's also true, I think, that this question impacts us personally and emotionally. And I think I envision a conversation where people feel free to speak in a very personal vein about how you're wrestling with the emotions caused by news of climate change. So can I see maybe a quick show of hands? And it would be great to have people who don't currently have their video on to join us for this, but if not, you can use the electronic hand. Can I see a show of hands? How many of you think about climate change and occasionally experience despair? All right, I'm seeing a lot of hands there. Okay. Just to drill down into the feeling you get, do you feel any anger about the issue? Again, show of hands, maybe. Interesting. Okay. And anybody here feeling guilt about the issue?
What did you say? I'm sorry, I missed it.
Yeah, I wonder if you're experiencing any guilt about climate change.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, fair number there. All right. Sadness. Okay. Well, so I guess I'm wondering in part whether these are the right emotions to have and whether we're experiencing them to the right degree. So despair is a famously disempowering attitude. It's an attitude that many people that both springs from a sense of powerlessness and possibly exacerbates that sense of powerlessness. So one question I hope we'll wrestle with is whether we should be feeling despair in the face of this, and if not, what's the alternative? Can we be honest about our predicament, yet still hopeful, proactive, and effective in the face of this challenge? And if so, how? How do we create the urgency needed to address the problem without making ourselves so anxious that we can't function as part of the solution? So I want to open it up here. What are your thoughts on this issue? And again, anything you have found helps you cope with the situation, or any strategies that you would recommend are very much to the point, and I'd love to hear how people are wrestling with this. Hank, you always do a good job of getting us going. So
thank you. Yeah, I just want to see if I can frame this from a let's call it a Buddhism perspective, and just introduce the notion of clinging. And so I would say, yes, despair. I mean, any feeling that we're going to have within reason, that you're not going to murder somebody or something like that, or even if you think it, it's a matter of staying overly attached or clinging to the emotion rather than recognizing it. Let's say, knowing you're judging it, knowing it's affecting on you, and using sort of everyday mindfulness without any fancy piece to it to help manage it. So I say I bring that up as a general, but also for myself as I practice that without any serious meditation. Just that notion has helped me sort of not cling to whatever joy joy I could like to cling to a little better, but any negativity or negative predictions where there's no room for prediction error. I'm getting better at that at age 74.
I like this suggestion on it. So maybe we should allow ourselves to feel despair and anger, but not wallow or in those feelings. Very nice, Hank. Thank you. Marcel. I don't know if the digital hand you have raised, Marcel, is an indication that you have something you want to share, but love to hear from you.
No, I forgot. I left that up there. But I mean, I'll just briefly, for myself, I think one of the ways that I deal with some of the feelings of despair is through the work that I do. There are elements of I work in the building construction industry and pushing designs and operations that save energy. I mean, that's one way that I can like regain, I guess, a sense of control, at least for me personally. So that at least that in some ways, that's what helps me get through my day to day, is that those wins that we can have at a small level help. At the same time, we experience a lot of frustrations along those lines as well, in terms of getting the right decisions that we want done.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of one of the ways that I deal with it.
I like, there's I think something really powerful in that. If you can find a sense of agency that relates to this problem, I think one of the reasons I find this problem so difficult, it's hard for me to even just imagine how I can act in meaningful ways given the scope of the problem. But no one of us needs to solve the problem by ourselves. If each of us acts in meaningful ways on a local scale, maybe we can solve it. Very nice, Marcel. Thank you. Diane, coming to you in a minute. I think Rob's been waiting. I do need you to unmute, Rob, if you're bottom left.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't working on the button. I was struck, many years ago was working as a futurist, and I raised climate change at a meeting and got a lot of pushback because clients don't want to hear bad news. And I was a little bit horrified at this response because it was a place that was supposed to be thinking about the future. I came across a guy I knew slightly named Jean-Pierre Dupuis, who came up with this concept of what he called enlightened doomsaying. And I find this a comforting concept, because if you cry too loudly, you get a Cassandra reaction. People don't pay attention to you. And if you speak in too muted a voice, they won't hear you. So you have to find just the right level at which to get people's attention and make them do something about it. And of course, if they do something about it, then the doom that you predicted doesn't happen, and they say you were wrong. So it's a conundrum.
Nice. Thank you.
But I think that thinking in terms of, what the right level of discourse is for engaging people is an important way of avoiding too much despair. My daughter is in despair. My granddaughter's 2, and she's not yet, but I'm trying to figure out ways to be a enlightened doomsayer. in that context.
Okay, thank you. Diane?
Hello, everybody. I'd like to come back to the idea that you shared just a minute ago, the idea of, being puzzled by what can I do? And, we've been watching this whole drama unfold slowly over time, and people have been talking about what's coming for a long time. But only very recently are we starting to see these, really dramatic climate-related events, and so forth. More people are paying attention. But also for a long time, we've had all this stuff about, save water, don't waste plastic, and this and that and the other. And like other people, probably all of you are doing things like, separating your garbage out from the recyclables, and thinking about whether you should do a lot of air travel. Well, COVID fixed that, but et cetera, et cetera. But I have come to think that action at that level is just self-pacifying. It doesn't really address the problem. What the problem is in the manufacturing and sale of all the things that are dangerous to the climate. And even though I'm a social psychologist and I know a little something about persuasion, I suppose, I really don't. I am baffled and actually, yes, in despair about how to attack this larger issue, because if it's not handled on a worldwide scale at the source rather than at the consumer end, then these goals of 1.5 degrees and so forth they're simply not going to be met.
Yeah.
And the other side of that is there's so many bits and pieces of human nature that incline the manufacturers and sellers and so on and so forth to proceed with what they're doing as much as possible, as long as possible, and to deny the long-term effects. And in fact, all of us are really not oriented to the long term, because the human brain doesn't work that way.
Yeah, fascinating. Yeah, both in terms of the time scale we're looking at here and in terms of the scale of collective action required. I don't know that humanity's ever mobilized on the scale that will be needed. It will be, if we do mobilize successfully, it'll be historically unprecedented. Yet appears necessary. Thank you, Diane. Lucas?
I spend an awful lot of time thinking about climate change. I'm an academic sociologist. I used to work in heavy industry and manufacturing, and I study environmental issues, particularly faith-based and community organizations, and how they've responded, because I've become extremely pessimistic about some kind of technological or economic or political fix, particularly in the United States, because it seems like there's a lot of obstruction, there's a lot of denial. I'm no longer optimistic that the sort of upper echelon halls of power are going to act fast enough to deal with the problem. So I started to ask myself, are there ways to devolve the problem in terms of scope and think about how culture can be changed and how community-based organizations might be working to do this. Religion came to mind, not because I'm particularly religious myself, but because it's such a visible aspect of civil society in the United States. And I found, I think, some things that are modestly encouraging. And there really does seem to be some interesting generation gaps, that younger people are much more concerned at the local level with issues like climate change and sustainability. I think that gives me a little bit of hope, even though I look at the the bigger picture, I look at the bigger machine, and I feel quite a bit of despair and frustration a lot of times.
Well, I hope you'll share more about your reasons for hope as the hour unfolds, Lucas. Thank you for that. Did any of you examine the articles I linked to in the provocation for this session? There were some interesting things there that I thought I'd share one or two whenever the queue shortens. But fortunately, Steve has just volunteered, so I'm gonna hold off on that for the moment. But Steve, what do you think?
Well, I just had one very quick comment there were several articles that were basically linking quote unquote mental illness to climate change. I'm a psychologist, retired psychologist. I'm hard pressed to label someone mentally ill for having a normal and understandable reaction to an external stressor. So to feel anxious and depressed about climate change, it would seem to me that what would be quote unquote ill would be to not feel depressed or anxious about climate change.
Fascinating. So maybe we should be anxious, depressed, depressed, guilty, all of those things. I think it was Aristotle who said, an important part of character is to feel the right emotion at the right time to the right degree. And it's actually kind of hard to figure out I mean, Steve's surely right that if we feel none of those things, there's something very wrong about that, right? So very, very nice suggestion, Steve. Thank you. So here's a question. Is despair the right emotion? Given that despair, while perfectly understandable and warranted, given that it's also disempowering and we need to be empowered to address this, is it the right emotion at the right time? Why not? So they say that effective people reframe challenges as opportunities or problems as opportunities. So suppose we take this problem of climate change, and instead of seeing it as a despair-worthy problem, what if we reframed it as what if we found a way to become energized by the challenge of dealing with it? What would it look like to contemplate the climate change problem and just be completely energized by the opportunity to save a world? I mean, geez, how many people in history get a chance to save the world? And we live in a time where we can. Damn, we're the lucky ones. Let's go to it. Oh no, is that the right emotion to feel at the right time? I don't know. I put it to you. Let's see, Hank. Do you hit that mute button? There you go.
Yeah, okay. I guess I'm going to get a little, I guess it goes back to kind of Freudian thinking about signal, or as some of you may know, signal anxiety. Doesn't mean you're a nervous wreck. It just tells you there's some kind of threat. So in the old days, they used to think of if you can not catastrophize, which we all do, or panic, if you manage the signal anxiety, you could also manage signal despair. That would be the other way of looking at it. So if we think of it from a neurobiological point of view, the despair is one of the threat detectors from way back. Yeah. So if you can, from my point of view, it's not just me managing it or any of us, but our reference groups, how they deal with signal despair or despair, which is everybody, the media, the documentary people, politicians in particular. Most of the politicians don't consult anybody here in their expertise. A lot of expertise in this room, And who's listening to the social psychologist or the social? They got another agenda. So these people, what do you call it, enable extremes, either denial or despair or overreaction.
And I love the third alternative you're proposing, Hank. I think you're right. We and the Buddhist tenor of your contribution here is I very much appreciate that. Diane.
Yeah, to come back to your idea of channeling your despair into a sense of opportunity, it seems a little pie in the sky to me, I'm sorry, unless you think you know what should be done, or you have a clear idea of your goal. Now, it could very well be that if you do have such an aim or goal, and you can say, oh, all these things are wrong and all these people are standing in my way, but I can see a way out. You know, your creativity could blossom there. But I think what makes people feel despair more than the sense of opportunity is the sense that basically they're in no position to create a solution.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Yeah, so here's one way to sort of pare down the problem and make it sort of actionable at an individual level. What if we were each given the tools to track our carbon footprint, like to measure how much carbon out the way we're living is pumping into the atmosphere, and also given the tools to reduce that to zero, so that we're what's the word, carbon neutral? Is that the term? What if we each of us individually set ourselves the challenge of changing the personal way we live from carbon positive to carbon neutral over the next 10 years? If 8 billion people on the planet, each and every one of them set themselves that challenge and rose to it, we might very well address this problem. Joe Velikovsky.
Thanks, Andy. Sorry, did you have your hand up before me?
It doesn't matter what order we go in. Go right ahead.
Oh, sorry.
It's the middle of the night for you in Australia. That should take precedence.
Thanks, Steve. Very kind. Yeah, I love your point, Andy, about tracking our carbon footprint. I think because of these apps we can get now in our smartphones that you can calculate, you know, if I'm buying and consuming this, and if I'm taking the bus as opposed to driving the car to work, this is my calculates my carbon footprint, and I can try and keep that minimized. Which what I love is that puts responsibility on the individual, but it comes back to ourselves. I threw into the chat an extra proposed solution, so that might be a bottom-up approach where each individual looking at the whole collective planet has to take responsibility for their own carbon footprint. So I think bottom-up is totally necessary, but some people aren't that ethical. Maybe they're rich, and maybe they have a yacht, and maybe they just don't care, or whatever the case may be. So a top-down approach as well, which is the thing called the Ethicizer, which is an app I've suggested. I put the link there. I'd love any feedback, which is an app in your phone that whenever you're about to do something, it monitors you and gives you a rating of what you're about to do. Is this ethical or this unethical? And it would include carbon footprints and things like that. So I think bottom up and top down might be a good way to try and tackle these sorts of things. As Andy, as you know, I used to be a rural firefighter for a couple of years as well. And we had a lot of wildfires in Australia in the last couple of years, and we have to go fight them. And I used to get angry, thinking, why have I got to go fight this fire? That my carbon footprint I'm not rich. I don't do a lot of conspicuous consumption, but I see people who do. And I think this guy over there, due to the butterfly effect, all these people are causing problems over here. And likewise, of course, there's people over here causing problems over there, or, you know, other parts of the world. So I used to be angry, but then I got the idea for the ethicizer, and now I can't wait. So if anyone wants to help build it, let me know. I've just been to the Computational Creativity Conference. So there's possibilities for these sorts of exciting solutions coming up sometime soon in the future. So there is hope. Fingers crossed.
Very cool, Belkowski. Thank you. I'm going to go with Steve and Jeremy, coming to you.
I pretty much want to support and second the two comments that Diane has made so far in our discussion. Earlier, when she made her first comment, I tried to put up the applause sign, and then I couldn't get the thing to go away. But at any rate, you know, there's a sort of a two things we've talked about are what we can do on an individual level, and then what governments and the global political community needs to do. And there's some tension, I think, between the two. You know, after 9/11, there was a term that came up, and people talked about security theater, which were things that would go on at airports and things that really didn't make you safer, but gave the appearance that you were safer and that people were doing things. That's now been resurrected in the pandemic, and people talk about hygiene theater. I mean, the prime example of that are restaurants that spray your table down before you sit there for an airborne virus. You know, there's just hygiene theater. I think the risk of comforting oneself solely by reducing your individual carbon footprint. I'm not saying I don't do that, but I think the risk of it is that might be global warming theater. And if that's all we do, there's not going to be enough of us. And so I really agree with Diane that one way I feel like I'm helpful is by supporting a political party in my country, America, which I think takes this seriously, and political candidates that take it seriously and will have the power at the level to do something about it. So that's my comment.
Excellent, thank you. Jeremy.
I think Steve said everything really that I wanted to say. I'm just going to say it again. So we've got the personal.
It's worth saying again. So
I'm just going to the European perspective, the personal and the political. And I absolutely agree with Steve. I wanted to applaud. I think I did try to applaud what Diane was saying. In Europe, we do have green parties, which, for instance, in Germany, there was a possibility it might even have had a chancellor from the German Green Party. And in Scotland, in the UK, the Green Party is now going to be forming a coalition in government. So coming back to the sort of despair issue, in a way, what Andy said right at the beginning, I was thinking, why do I not exactly feel despair? I wouldn't use that word. And Andy's antidote to despair is activism. And it may be pathetic in a way, but when I go out and shove leaflets through, Green Party leaflets through people's door, or even knock on their door and encourage them to vote for a Green candidate, it's a kind of antidote to despair that goes along with reducing air travel and not eating meat, etc. I'm just going to finish by, I hope this isn't too long, Andy, but we have one Green member of Parliament, her name is Caroline Lucas, in the UK, because we have this grossly unfair first past the post system for electing members of Parliament. If we had proportional representation, we'd have about 70 or 80 Green members. But Caroline gave a lovely talk that I went to a while back, and she showed, I think it was a New Yorker cartoon, where someone said, well, in order to reduce our carbon footprint and counteract global change, we need a much more equal society. We need a society where people use bicycles and their feet rather than motor cars. And there was a whole list of all the wonderful things that you needed to do. And then someone said, oh, but what if climate change is a hoax? And the point of the cartoon was, irrespective of what one's views on climate change might be, actually a low carbon society would undoubtedly be a more equal society, a more healthy society, and I think the kind of society that most people would want to live in.
Nice. Thank you, Jeremy. Gail, can you build on that?
Or disagree with it?
You know, I would very much like to build on it. I think that, yeah, you know, when you start talking about the emotional response that we all have, whether it's despair or anger and so on, you're speaking very individually, and there is a tendency to individualize, if you will, the focus when talking about climate change and, you know, are you sorting your garbage correctly and so on, the carbon footprint. This is not an individual problem. It is a social problem. It is a problem of power. It is a problem of ingrained production of a particular type of energy. We all know that the analysis of the problem is now absolutely clear. We cannot burn fossil fuels. There is a fossil fuel industry that is enormously powerful in this world. That is preventing the action. My anger is directed at them. All right, my anger is directed at the political structures that are so beholden to them financially, afraid that they can threaten job loss, etc., that they're literally paralyzed in what they do, that their first response is to say, how can we help the energy industry transition? Our standard political institutions, certainly in the Western democracies, are incapable of handling this. They are moving at a snail's pace. That's the focus of my anger. And
interesting.
when I come to despair, well, I'm a sociologist, okay, and an economic sociologist, if you will, or was at one time in my life. The answer, the solution at this point is for people to get together at a community level. It has to be community organization. It has to be an offset. I know we're in the middle of, I'm in Canada, we're in the middle of a federal election, and it's eeny, meeny, miny, mo, truly. And the anger that is felt. So what am I doing? I'm in every possible seniors environmental group, pushing for community activism, and to try and convince the powers that be, and that has to be the political structure in our world, that they have to shut down that industry. They have to build the alternative. We have to prepare the population, especially the disadvantaged, on how to handle this without falling into despair.
Fascinating.
That is the individual response.
Gail, that's wonderful and inspiring, Gail. Thank you. You're a model. I'm gonna try to do more of that myself. You heard you say that. Thanks again. Alan.
Yes, thanks. I also think that it's not an individual problem. It's not a choice problem. But that's probably my own opinion. I don't think people choose much of anything. I mean, all these consumption patterns are not really, you know, people reaching down deep inside for what they need and buying what they really want. It makes them happy. I mean, that's just like nonsense. So it's systemic. It's coming from it's coming from the suppliers, and we have a big problem though in the political reaction. And first I want to say that I completely agree with what, you know, where Gail was coming from and some of the comments by Steve, and the need for this kind of political reaction. But we have a problem. We have an investment problem. We don't know how to invest our resources. If we give it out privately, you know what happens with that. And if we let the top levels of government do it, we know what happens with that. So what's between those two? And it's a really interesting questions about how you may, structure social institutions in order to invest in our future, and how you might think about, doing that kind of work. And of course, this group is kind of ideally situated to think about those things. I mean, we've got, the pro-social people talking about the Nobel Prize, Olenstrom, and Nobel Prize winning kinds of things. If we put our heads to what that might look like in terms of how we invest our resources in the future, we might actually come up with something that might be helpful.
Nice. Thank you, Alan. Sage, can you, I see you, Nelson. We'll come to you in a minute.
Yeah, I guess the one thought to be had is it is true, and it's inspiring that, even lower level action is beneficial, both to that lower level. Think of a big city, it's beneficial for them to make these changes, per Alan's point. But the real challenge and the real cognitive dissonance is that the real costs, the biggest casualties are really distributed and operate at different levels of sensitivity. So, we know that, and I was looking at the IPCC, and the truth is that things like coral reefs or the Arctic, amphibians, in all but like the most completely optimistic scenarios, they're just so sensitive to the changes that are happening that even if we all just had this lower level action to the kind of the big general problems that are happening, those costs are going to be distributed and happen regardless, and cannot be mitigated at a lower level. They can only be mitigated if the global average is put in line. So in some ways it's kind of challenging and different, but I mean, it doesn't make me feel better to think that the coral reefs will be gone, but it also is helpful to kind of start partitioning the different levels of sensitivities in like these scenarios, right? It's not, there's no all or nothing scenario where everything is terrible and, everything is good. It's like in different scenarios, every time pretty much coral reefs, the Arctic, and amphibians are screwed, but forests, and other things that it's hard to list off the top of my head are probably going to be okay. They will change, but it's not all the same. So it's kind of helpful almost to think about what that means in these impacts, to kind of accept that some of these things are truly at risk and others will be, degraded, but much less. And it's helpful to it makes it less existential, I think, thinking that way.
Nice. Thank you, Sage. Lucas.
So, yeah, I very much share Gail's and Alan's anger, honestly, frustration, but I feel like in my own case, it's tempered by a profound sense of guilt, because we need to leave the fossil fuels in the ground if we want this problem to be mitigated, right? But at a more ground level, those fossil fuels and jobs proximate to them are feeding my family and employing my friends. And I grew up in a blue collar environment in Texas where the oil industry is everywhere, and that was kind of your ticket out, right? You could make decent money if you could work in some of those manufacturing and repair kind of industries. So I'm concerned about the people too, and that's, I think, one of the motivations I've had to scale back in terms of tactics, if not in terms of realizing that this is a big problem, that this is a huge problem, and that this is a global problem. And global problems, how do you solve global problems with local efforts, I guess, ends up becoming my question. How do we work bottom up, more bottom up? Yeah, carbon offsetting is good, but it's not going to do the job, right? You've got to have some community level durable organizations that are going to change hearts and minds, right? That are going to get people moving. I wrote a book about my research, and I'll stop after this. I don't want to hawk my book, but yeah, some of the optimism that I feel at the ground level in the United States. I'll put the link in the chat, but thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Lucas. Gail.
Sorry. What specifically on the question of guilt, it is again an emotion. I feel all of these emotions, but I cannot and I will not accept responsibility for something that I didn't put in place. I only accept responsibility for something that is still in place that I'm not protesting, that I'm not trying to change. But I have this incredible angst. To me, we're living the ultimate tragedy. We have evolved as the most intelligent form of life on Earth, to the point where we can actually know what is going on, what causes what. Now, we're far from having perfect knowledge, obviously, but we are just always one or two steps behind. We tend to act in the world without perfect knowledge, and 50 to 100 years later, we find out we've poisoned this, or we've ruined that, or we've done whatever. And this race between science, if you will, and our own action, to me is the ultimate tragedy. The most knowing form of life is going to essentially do itself in. And
yeah,
that's one level that I simply have not been able to overcome. And that is my most despairing issue.
Yeah, I hear you. If we manage to destroy ourselves, I think we need to withdraw our claim to be the most intelligent creature on the planet, of course. I've heard it said that
contradictory, unfortunately. We are still doing it.
I like it. I've heard it also said that our cleverness outstrips our wisdom, and that distinguishes kinds of intelligence in ways that help me make sense of this sort of situation we face. Thank you, Gail. I want to hear from Kathleen.
Good afternoon. So far, it seems the conversation keeps hinging on whether there are reasons for optimism or not, or whether we feel optimistic. And I'm wondering if this subject, climate change and despair, might also be about, well, how do we manage despair? And it doesn't seem like hanging it on the outcome of our triumph or defeat in climate change and so forth is actually very healthy. There's an extent to which, basing your feelings on an external outcome isn't. So it seems like part of this is, well, how do we manage despair, independently of that?
Yeah, to a certain extent, we should all regulate our emotions to have them function well within our limits, within the limits of what we can accomplish. So you watch some of the most successful athletes and coaches interviewed on television, and they always say, I don't worry about stuff I can't control. I focus on things I can control. And I regulate my emotions to help me operate best within that range. And maybe we all need to do that in regard to this issue too. Not really nice observation. I must apologize. I think Nelson had a hand up before, and Nelson, I forgot to come back to you. My apologies. There we go.
No worries. Well, I'm located in Colombia, third world country, and as a member of this community, and being a liberal in my way of thinking, I would like to address one issue that I would say is important for everyone living in the upper hemisphere. Is that, for instance, we still have 1 billion people living in this world without electricity. and that 1 billion people is living in India, China, Namibia, whatever countries in the sub-Saharan areas. So when we're worried about climate change and how can we manage the consciousness of the people, trying to avoid a strong decrease of the global, of the human subsistence, human being subsistence, we have to find out, raise this issue just because as a point of discussion, not as a point of having any solution at all. But can we find a correlation between despair because climate change and despair because inequalities among all people living in this world? I would say that we have in the northern hemisphere, you did a lot of industrialization issues. You took every coal from the earth and use it, and now you guys are conscious that we all have to do something to avoid destroying things. But at the same time, we as a world, as Lucas was saying, as Alan was saying, we as a world has to find some ways to worry about issues that are common in the southern hemisphere, but not in the northern. So I'll raise that question honestly in a very frank way.
Yeah.
But just as a matter of discussion, not a matter of saying a fact. Thank you.
Thank you, Nelson. No, you're certainly right that certain countries and certain hemispheres have done much more to exacerbate climate change than others. And now we're talking about, I mean, the United States remains the second biggest emitter of carbon on the planet next to China. And there are many countries in the world that generate very little carbon. So thank you for that. Guys, we're down to our last 10 minutes. I see several hands up. I'd like to call on a few of you. I need the last few minutes to choose a topic for next time. So Steve and Sage, I can hear from each of you if you can keep it short.
I'll try to be as brief as I can, although brevity is not one of my strong suits. I'll do my best. There, I'm already not being brief. I just wanted to respond to something Kathleen said and bring it back to the topic of despair and say something about evolution, since that's ostensibly what we all have in common, is an interest in looking at things through the lens of evolution. So species go extinct. And it may be the height of narcissism to think we somehow may be exempt from that. We may go extinct, and it may be climate change seems like pretty likely candidate at the moment that could do that. I mean, eventually the sun's going to blink out and we'll probably go extinct that way. Climate change must speed it up. Now, you would think that in saying this, that would fuel total despair, but in fact, it doesn't. And there's a term that came up in one of our earlier meetings, optimistic nihilism, which sounds like an oxymoron, but there is something, for me at least, somewhat freeing in thinking, well, okay, that's a possibility here. I'm not going to dwell on it, but I'm also going to, take what steps on the personal and political level I can do to prevent that, but it might occur. Now that gets harder if I look at my grandchildren. Then that makes it a little more difficult. But I sort of, if I can turn my emotions off as a grandfather and just think about it intellectually, somehow that kind of optimistic nihilism is a way for me to avoid despair.
Well said. Thank you. Sage?
Wanted to share one point of hopefully optimism for each of us as an individual. When I was looking at the IPCC report, and something struck me that I haven't forgotten, which is that they said the necessary industrial, economic, technological change that is necessary to overcome, to adapt to climate change is not unprecedented in terms of rate. We've changed these industries and things like that this quickly before, but it is unprecedented in terms of scale. And so what that means for feelings of despair is that what this is not about is railing against, pleading a few industries, a few actors to do something totally crazy, unprecedented, and changing everything about how they do it. What it is about is taking wherever you are, whatever sectors and people that you have access to, and encouraging a precedented level of transformation in those areas. And if we can do that, then we actually might succeed. But transformation of the fossil fuel industry or agriculture tomorrow is not enough. It's got to be much bigger. And to me, that's optimistic in that we actually all have the ability to push a little further wherever we are.
Wow. Thank you, Sage. That's actually a really nice. Hank, I do see your hand up. Let me see if I can get our topic choice in. Maybe we can come back to you, all right, for the final word. Okay, so we are now going to select a topic for next month. I have a few in mind, but let me change things up by inviting topics from the floor first, rather than after I mention a few. Would anyone like to propose a discussion topic for next month? I know that question always leaves my mind blank when I get a question like that. So certainly, Kathleen, do you have something?
What about something to do with attachment theory and mothering, or?
I would love that. That sounds good to me. Yes. So just to add a little bit of flesh to the bones there, I guess there is a attachment theory of the best way to parent, and it's very controversial.
Yeah,
but
because I've been reading a lot of new ones out there, you know, that the mother-infant dyad has been really overemphasized, and to the point that we don't really understand how important the wider social caregiving environment is, and
nice.
Related to what makes people grow up to care or not, which
I love it. I could see that being a really rich topic. Can I label that one the attachment parenting topic? And we can also bring an evolutionary perspective to see what light that sheds. That'll be good. Okay. I'll throw in a couple more, and then we'll use approval voting. This relates to a topic that's been in the news here in the US lately, fetal development and the ethics of abortion. I don't think I need to say anything more about that. How about automation, universal basic income, and the future of work? And let's say overcoming vaccine resistance or vaccine hesitancy would be a fourth. Also one that relates to a topic on many minds. Okay, I'm prepared to ask for your votes now. So find the reactions button at the bottom of your screen, and I'll ask you to raise your hand if you would like to discuss the topic. We'll go through each in turn. You can vote for as many or as few as you like. Fair enough. And Sage, you'll be counting votes for me, correct? All right. Okay, all those in favor of discussing attachment parenting and what we can learn about that, please raise your hand. Be nice if you could raise your electronic hand, but if need be, you can wave your hand furiously in the screen and we'll try to count that as well. I see one or two. Okay. So Sage, we want to add one, I think, to the list of electronic hands. Okay, thank you, everyone. Hands down. Second topic, fetal development and the ethics of abortion. All those in favor, raise a hand, please. Okay. Thank you. Hands down. Third topic, automation, universal basic income, and the future of work. Gee, I packed so much into that title. That seems to have helped its prospects. Okay, and finally, well, hands down. And finally, overcoming vaccine resistance. Marcel, the clap, take the clap. We're going to treat that as the same as a hand. That's fine. All right. Okay. Thank you, everyone. All right. Hands down, and Sage will tell us if we have a winner.
Well, we have 12 for attachment theory and 11 for automation and UBI.
Okay, well, in that case, attachment parenting is our topic for next time, and I will be sure to raise automation and UBI as a topic for possibly 2 months hence, because both of those got strong showing. Okay, I now have homework. Thanks to Kathleen, I have homework. I got to go learn something about attachment parenting between now and next time. Thank you, Kathleen. And thank you all. I think I promised Hank the final word here. Hank, do you have a last brief word about our topic for today?
Okay. Whoops. Yeah, this is going to be a rough one because it's kind of a paradox. I forget the couple, the two evolutionary biologists. I forget their name, but the beginning of the title of the book is, oh God, let me do this quick. Something about hunter-gatherers, blah, 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 blah. And it's cognitive dissonance between our capacity to adapt to the modern world. I don't know if anybody remembers their name. I just listened to a couple of interviews with them. And according to them, as you pardon the expression, we're fucked.
You're going to leave us? You're going to let that be the last word?
That's what I mean. I don't go for it, but that is a perspective that ancient brain, gets triggered. Not only does the fish brain get triggered when we're traumatized or we're involved in the world, but the brain of the hunter-gatherer or the agriculture group, that gets triggered. And I see that as in therapy. I don't know if Steve has or other people or Jeremy, but that comes up when people sort of get destabilized. And you think about how you use evolutionary psychology to help people on a one-to-one. I don't know how to.
Yeah,
we're more experts in terms of dealing with groups, but we have to keep it in mind. So when I forget who said it, but whoever said what is it? Having optimism based on that, I would say that's the wrong way to think of it.
Okay. Well, so
within the limits of the evolutionary brain. Sorry, but
no, that's quite all right. Thank you, Hank. So
the
next
brain
time
is evolving by AI. Think about the high-tech brain. Where does that fit?
So next time you're tempted to despair, everyone, just remember Hank's inspiring words. We're all fucked. Take heart and go back to smiling. Okay.
And then you don't have to cling to optimism. Sorry, but yeah. All right.
And keep smiling, guys. We're going to get through this. All right. We're going to help each other through this. Thanks everybody for your insights today. I had a lot of fun. I hope you did too, and I hope to see you again next month. Take care.
See ya.